How's it going, guys, and welcome to today's video. Last week on the channel, as some of you saw, we finally got to pull the hammer mill out and give it a test, and it worked pretty good. So now that we have the ability to grind up our own feed, I thought it would be a good time to talk about how to mix our own feed. That's what we're doing today on Farmer Tyler Ranch. Now, before I show you guys how I mix up a ration for my pigs, I need to grind up some rice because that's a big part of what we're giving them. And as some of you suggested, I'm going to weigh the bucket before and after grinding and calculate how much we lose in dust or whatever else during the grinding process. Then we'll put it all together and I'll show you how to measure it out to make sure that you got the right protein content that you're after. All right, so we have here a relatively full bucket of rice. So let's go ahead and weigh it, see what it weighs. This bucket reads 22.26. I think we'll just call it 22 1/4. Now I'm going to run this rice through the mill and we'll weigh it again and see how much we lost. Well, with the rice all ground down, the bucket is a little over halfway full. It wasn't quite full when I dumped it in there, so let's weigh it and see what we got. The scale now shows 16.09. We'll just round that to 16. That works out to about a 28% loss, which is actually quite a lot higher than I thought it was going to be. So that tells me that I really need to go through this thing and seal up the cracks. I know there's a big crack like in the lid where it closes that I see a lot of stuff coming out of. So I think if I get that one, and then once I have this thing going solid pipe all the way into a bin, that's going to help me keep a lot more of that in there as well. So now that we got that done, let's gather up our other ingredients and I'll show you how to mix up a good ration. When you mix up your own feed, there's really only a few things that you need. The first thing, of course, is a scale. It doesn't have to be the most accurate scale in the world, but just, something to get you close enough. The other thing that you're going to need are a bunch of buckets, because what I like to do is have one bucket hanging on the scale so I can weigh out each individual thing, and then once I get the weight that I want, I can dump it into the mix bucket, which will have all my ingredients in there after they've been weighed out. Then I can mix it up and feed it to the pigs. The other thing that you need, which probably should go without saying, but you need to know what you're putting in your ration. So for instance, I've got this milk replacer here. Take the time to read the label. Mostly what I'm looking at is going to be the crude protein, because that's the reason that I'm adding the milk replacer, is just as a little protein boost. But there's a lot of other good stuff in here too. Bags of feed, kind of the same thing. This tag on the bottom, this tag's going to tell you everything that you need to know. The tag's a little mangled, but we can still see what we're after. So right here, the top one is crude protein, which I think that's always the first one that they list on these tags. So what we have here is 16%. Obviously, it's really easy to determine the nutritive value of any ingredient that you're using that came with a tag on the bag. But what about the other things like eggs or rice that I'm also going to be putting in this ration? How do we determine what value those have? So this is patty rice that we're using, and the difference between patty rice and rice that you would buy in the store is that this is basically what the rice kernel would be directly from the field. It hasn't been milled by a professional mill or anything like that. So what that means is that the nutritive value in this rice is going to be different than what you buy in the store. See, the rice, or white rice I should say, that you buy in the store has had the bran stripped off. That's why it has that bright white color. Well, the rice bran actually has a lot of protein in it. So I know, because I've worked in the industry, that patty rice like this has a protein content of about 7.5%. White rice that you buy in the store is somewhere around 2 to 3% protein. Now, I know that most people aren't going to be using rice when they mix up a ration for their chickens or their pigs or whatever it may be, because rice isn't really readily available across the country. Most of you are probably going to end up using corn, and corn actually has a pretty similar feed value as rice does. I think corn is about 7% protein and rice is 7.5%, so pretty similar. The only reason that I'm using rice instead of corn is just because I have access to it. So the last thing that I'm going to be putting in this ration today is eggs. Now, one might think that finding the protein content of eggs is really easy because you could just look on any carton from the store and it should tell you how much protein is in there. And that's true, but usually they give you protein in grams where we're looking for a percentage. That's what we need to mix up our ration. So after looking around online a little bit, I saw a lot of measurements of how many grams of protein are in each egg and how many grams a complete egg weighs. So we can figure out a percentage when we have these two values. And what I'm seeing is eggs are on average about 14% protein. So once I know what all my ingredients are gonna be, I like to just make a list and go through and write down the protein content in a decimal form that represents a percentage. So like eggs are 14%, so that's 0.14. Milk replacer is 22%, that's 0.22, and so on. So the next thing that I do, and I'm sure there's a better way to do this mathematically, but I just kind of play with the rations because I kind of know what I want my target to be. But when you're using a bunch of different ingredients, sometimes it's difficult to know how you're gonna get there. So just for starters, I'm gonna do 2 pounds of rice, 2 pounds of hog feed, 1 pound of milk replacer, and 1 pound of eggs. So when I know how many pounds I'm going to use of each ingredient, I can multiply the protein percentage by the number of pounds that are going to be in the ration. So rice is 2, hog feed is 2, milk replacer is 1, and eggs are 1. So after you multiply the pounds of each ingredient by their own protein value, that will tell you how much protein each ingredient is adding to the ration. Does that make sense? Let me show you on paper. For rice, we're using 2 pounds at 7.5 protein, or 0.075. So that gives us 0.15. Now, what that number means is that of these 2 pounds of rice, 0.15 of those pounds are protein. Look down at the hog feed, it's the same thing. 0.16 for 16% protein times 2 pounds means 0.32 of those 2 pounds are protein. So we do that for all the ingredients. And once we have all these numbers, we're going to add them all up to get your total protein content, and then you need to add up the total amount of pounds that you're using in your ration. So after adding all these up, we have a 6 pound total ration, and of those 6 pounds, 0.83 pounds are protein. The next thing you want to do is take your protein number, which in this case is 0.83, divide it by the total pounds in the ration, and in this case it gives us 0.138. Now we're going to multiply this number by 100, and that will give us our total percentage protein. So without having to actually write that out, we know if we multiply by 100, we can just move this decimal over 2 places. So this is going to be a 13.8% ration. So for growing pigs, 13.8% is pretty low as far as protein goes. So I need to play with these ingredients. I need to figure out which my high protein contributors are and which my low protein contributors are, and I need to adjust them as necessary to reach the target percentage that I'm after. After playing with these numbers a little bit, I've reached a protein content that's going to be acceptable for now. It's still not as high as I want it to be, but my big problem right now is that I don't have an ingredient that is really high in protein. What I need is soybean meal. Usually when you mix up a ration like this, you have something like soybean meal that's going to give you the protein, something like rice that's going to give you the bulk, and then whatever other additives you want to put in there. I have a lot of egg laying chickens, a lot more eggs than I can eat, so that makes a good thing to put it in the pig ration. And the other thing to note is that because I'm using regular hog feed in this mix, I don't need to add extra vitamins and minerals. Later, when I just use soybean meal and rice, I'm gonna need to add minerals to that, but the store-bought hog feed already has minerals in it, so I don't feel like I need to add those quite yet. So now that I more or less know what my mix is supposed to be or how many pounds of each ingredient I wanna try to add, let's go ahead and mix them up, weigh them out, and see what we get. So the first thing that we're gonna do is hang an empty bucket up here and tare the scale. Okay, so we're at 0 there. Let's go ahead and add the rice first. All right, so I'm shooting for 1 pound of rice. This is at 0.99. I'm good with that. Next, I'm gonna add 3 pounds of store-bought hog feed. We've got 3.08. That is definitely close enough for what we're doing. Now, just as with the rice, we're gonna dump this into our mixed ration bucket. I think that's what we decided we're gonna call it. So the next ingredient that I'm gonna weigh out is the eggs, and I will admit that I weighed these out before, so I'm pretty close to where I need to be, but we'll go ahead and do it again. We have 1.32 pounds of eggs. It's a lot of eggs. For me, here's where the precision kind of goes out the window. So on paper, I've got this calculated out to be accurate, you know, right down to the pound. But when you're weighing out your ingredients, sometimes you can't weigh out a pound of eggs because, you know, if you take 1 egg away, it's less than a pound. If you add an egg, it's more than a pound. So since the eggs are really adding protein, vitamins, just all good stuff, I'll go ahead and err on the high side with eggs. So these pigs will go ahead and eat all these shells, but I don't know that they need them all. So we'll give them a few because they do get calcium from them, but I don't think they need all of these. So the last thing I have to measure out here is the powdered milk, and because I have a cheap scale, when you add weight to it slowly, it doesn't always register. So what I like to do is go ahead and tare everything out with a little pan in there, and then I can put about what I think how much milk I'm gonna need and weigh it again, and the scale seems to just work better that way. So I don't know, you might have a better scale than I do. Okay, so I've got what I think is close to a pound of powdered milk here. Let's put it on the scale and see what we really have. All right, it's 0.88. I'm gonna add a little bit more, call it good. Now we're at 1.1 pounds of powdered milk. We ended up with 6 pounds in the bucket. We know how much of each ingredient we put in the bucket, and we know how much protein each ingredient adds to the entire ration. So I can be pretty confident in knowing what my protein content is in this ration. Keep in mind, guys, no matter what ingredients you're using in your ration, you can figure out your protein content the way that I just showed you. Thanks for hanging out in the shop with me today, and I hope I'll see you again on Farmer Tyler Ranch.